button right now. Okay, I'm pleased to introduce our two participants. Curtis Chamblee is a first-year doctoral student at the University of Memphis. His research lies in the intersection of race, social movements, and popular culture. Lisa M. Corrigan is the author of Prison Power: How Prison Influenced the Movement for Black Liberation, and most recently, Black Feelings, Race, and Affect in the Long Sixties, both published by University Press in Mississippi. This will be a question and answer format, and I encourage you to go ahead and mute your microphones right now. Use the chat to place questions that you would like to have addressed, and we'll turn it over now to Lisa and Curtis.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the folks at University Press of Mississippi for hosting us this afternoon. Really do appreciate it. Basically, I want to start with how this kind of happened, how this kind of blossomed, and how we got to this point today. There was a mutual friend of Dr. Corrigan and I. They posted about wanting to understand what everyone's doing during the pandemic, their work schedules. And I've always been a curious student. So I've always been like, ooh, what are people saying about this? And Dr. Corrigan placed her work schedule on the Twitter account, on the feed at the time. And I saw it and I was just blown away to have done this for 20 years in academia. And it's just like, you look at her schedule, and I'll let her get into that. It was mind blowing. I was like, thank you for sharing. It doesn't set a bar, but it kind of gives you an idea of the work you have to do and put in, and how you go about, how you set up your week, your schedule. And then of course, when I saw the schedule, it then opened the floodgates to all these questions I had. And of course, I grew up in rural North Carolina, and one rule that my grandpa once told me was, don't ever get a no before you get a no. So I'm unabashed and I was unafraid. I said, hey, Dr. Corrigan, do you have some time? Can I ask you a few questions? And as we're going back and forth, and I'm asking the questions and she's answering them, and then she says, why not just chat with you and with your grad students, with your colleagues at Memphis? And I was like, you can do that? And from that point, yes. And from that point, the University Press of Mississippi came in to host, and fast forward to to this moment right now, we're here, and this is how it came to be. So that's how this happened. The way this 90 minutes is going to work, because I want to be mindful of both your time as well as Dr. Corrigan's time and everyone's time, is like the first hour is we have, I want to thank the CGSA at the University of Memphis, the conference group. The folks there put together a list of questions under some broad headings of mentorship, writing, publishing, and then kind of a miscellaneous catch-all. And I'm gonna go through the questions for the first hour. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna look at chat, and if the questions tie into the responses that we're getting and so on and so forth, we'll have that, we'll incorporate those questions. But also at the end, so for like the last 30 minutes, we'll just open it up for questions from everyone that's here. I hope that kind of gives you an idea of what we're going to do. And so I'm gonna go ahead and just start firing away and get started because I'm excited. So under mentorship is where we're starting. What are key attributes, Dr. Corrigan, you look for or tell students to look for in a potential mentor?
Thanks. Thanks for that, Curtis. And thanks for hollering at me on the internet. I love to do these kinds of talks. And I think that one thing that the communication field actually does not do well at is professionalizing. I think we could do a lot more of these sorts of things to democratize information and to resource share. So I'm glad that you were down for this, and thanks everybody for being here. I mean, this is a good place to start because I think I was a very unruly mentee. And I was probably very unmentorable, actually. So my philosophy about mentorship, I think, has grown out of that. And part of that is because the communication field was a very different place 20 years ago, actually. And there were not a bunch of white folks clamoring to do critical race work. So there were not a lot of mentors available to do that. So in some ways that was a constraint of the discipline, and in some ways it was probably a constraint of my post-debate trauma personality, but I was pretty unmentorable. I sought out mentors, but also there was nobody to really talk about how to do that as a white kid, as a poor white kid, as a first-gen white kid in an R1, especially with mentors of color. And so there was no real, I don't know, demystification of the process of doing race work together with right, in the academy. So I think when we think about what kind of mentors that you intentionally seek out, it is an intentional process. I think a lot of people fall in, right? You come into a program, you get assigned to a human. I was assigned to humans, and sometimes it's loosely around your interest areas. Mine, when I came to grad school, is the Cold War, because I did stuff basically from the 19 teens to the 1980s was the period I was looking at. But there were no race scholars, so it's not like I was going to work with somebody who knew anything about Black life in America or like third world revolutionaries or any of the stuff that I ended up writing about. And so just the first step is when you get assigned to somebody, you don't have to stay with them if it's not a good fit. And so there are different, I think, personalities and departments about changing mentors. And you should be aware of that try and figure out what that is as soon as possible. Because some people are really fragile about that and some people don't care because it's just like work and there's only more work, right? So think about who you want to mentor with and think about it as an intentional choice. But then I think that there are qualities that are like essential about mentorship that are non-negligible. So I think generosity is the most important for me. So who is going to be generous? Who is going to model generosity? And I mean that with resources, material resources, cash, money. And I mean that with time. And I mean that with feedback. And I mean that with the Rolodex. Like, are they going to be generous with their network for you? Or are they resource hoarders? I joke a lot that white people are hoarders, and that's why all their TV shows are about hoarders, like whether they're old people with cats and newspapers, or whether they're like Kardashians, but like white people hoard resources, and the academy is hyper white. So think about where the resources are going and who is going to divest resources into you as somebody who's a collaborator. I think loyalty is important, but can also be toxic. So I think people who are going to ride for you, knowing who will and who won't is like the most important skill set. It's probably more important than productivity or good ideas or even access to cash, because the academy is full of a lot of really intensely insecure people who have been produced that way because the information is not being democratized. And that's not entirely their fault, but I'm saying it's hyperstructural. So who will do loyalty to you? Who will show up every single time? Who wants to do the work to professionalize you? Who will help you with your writing? Who will help you with your job talks? Who will help with your conference presentations? Who is deeply invested in the art of mentoring and is self-aware about it enough to understand that they have to show up for you? I think people who want to do idea work. So there are academics who are hardcore burned out, and so they just don't have the mental space to do new stuff with grad students, and they also cannot admit it. And so you have to have a sensibility about who is burnt out and who has the capacity to do new idea work, and also who's keeping up, right? So like the academy right now, especially because it's shrinking, is super top heavy with a bunch of people who came out at a way different time in the history of the university and have no idea about what the job market is like, or the publication game is like, or pay scales, like so much. So have a sensibility about when they came in, right, to the academy and what they might know and not know and what their capacity is. You want somebody who doesn't shame. So shame is the most toxic like performance in the academy, and it's everywhere and it's rampant. And sometimes that's toxic overproductivity. Sometimes it's gossip. Sometimes it's workplace mobbing. Sometimes it's gaslighting, but it always comes out as hyper disciplining bodies. And so that is to be avoided for sure. Avoid that kind of toxic behavior because it comes from a place of insecurity. And it also comes from a place of manufactured scarcity. Even though the university is shrinking, there is still tons of abundance abundance within it. And so academics, white women in particular, overproduce this faux scarcity as a way of creating control, especially around other people that they're competitive with. So like avoid that. And you definitely want people who can place you in a job as like a material practical consideration. So if the people that you're working with have not successfully placed graduate students in jobs in like 10 years, that's a red flag. And that's not going to help you. And it doesn't matter if you're on the R1 track and you want to have a research job, fine. If you want to get a PhD and go out of the academy, fine. If you're doing terminal master stuff, fine. But your advisor's job is to get you a job. And quite frankly, there are not enough of the PhD jobs. So you need somebody who's going to be honest and straight with you about whether that is a track that they can help you maneuver into or not. So those are some things off the top of my head that I think are really need to guide, right? And advisees' mentality about choosing mentors. The other thing is that mentors choose you back and they don't have to like you, right? You can do really great work even if things are abrasive and weird. So these are not your friends. Like your graduate cohort are not your friends. The people you work with are not your friends. Your advisor is not your friend. Do not conflate the role that they are playing at this period in your life with other roles that are adjacent. They're not your parents. Don't let them infantilize you and produce that narrative. They're not your mob boss, so don't let them do mafia capitalism. They are none of those. They're just your direct supervisor at a job. So do not fetishize the advisor role to be something that it is not. End rant.
Awesome. Kind of to piggyback off that original question and kind of go from there with the things you should look for in a mentor. Dr. Corrigan, what makes a good mentee? What makes someone that's able to be, that a mentor would want to mentor?
Okay, so I got to tell you, mentorship has changed in the last 10 years. And I don't know if all the faculty, I see all faculty out here lurking. I don't know if you feel this way too, but I need you to not ghost your mentor. I mean, I cannot explain to you the rage I feel about ghosting people who have invested in you with their time and monies. It is inexplicable to explain to you the depth of rage that causes. It is the most destructive thing that you could do to a relationship in a workplace, aside from workplace mobbing. It is the most toxic avoidant behavior. Do not do it. You have got to be able to say, I'm sorry I dropped the ball. I apologize. How can we move forward? Everybody will ride with you on that. Every single person will be like, cool. I also drop balls. Look at how many I juggle. It does in fact happen. Let us continue to have a productive working relationship. But if you cannot do that, this is not the place for you. You cannot ghost people. The community is super small and everybody knows who those people are. And those are not people that get jobs. So don't do that. That is an absolute no. Also, you got to be able to move through your own personal shame about whatever you feel are your problems, whatever they are, but especially the writing ones. Writing doesn't get done because you're not writing. Like plumbers don't have plumber's block. Electricians don't have electrician block. It is not, writer's block is not a thing. It's you standing in your own way. It's not a real thing. All of you have done tons and tons and tons of ideas. So don't talk yourself out of them. You're just shooting off your own feet. So like, if you can't get past yourself, nobody can get in there to pull you out of the quicksand. That's you doing that to yourself. So don't do that. So good mentees recognize when they are self-sabotaging and they were like, hey, I'm stuck. And then we come and reel you out. You know, it is a collaborative thing. You are not producing stuff on your own. This is a group effort. This is teamwork. And nobody wants to be the advisor who's the group project person who finishes the project. Nobody has time for that. We're all working 100 times harder, especially the women of color and men of color, the 4 of them that get to stay in the academy are working 100 times harder than you are. So don't do that. Time management is important. So be honest with your own personal commitments to yourself and to your advisor about what you can handle. Slower is sometimes fine. Faster is sometimes fine. But if you cannot communicate expectations about your ability to manage your deliverables, you are messing up your relationship. Just be honest about it and everything else will be okay. But if you cannot manage expectations, Nobody is going to come in and do that work for you. And I say this stridently because it's serious stuff that nobody tells you to think about. But you are in charge of managing your expectations. It's your relationship to manage because these are not your parents. So if you fall off, nobody can come and get you. There are too many. There's too much work to be done. We cannot come and find you and make you do your work, right? Capitalism does not provide for that. None of us have the net to be able to do that. So don't do that. I think good mentees are honest and they can be as flexible as they can. I hate the word resilience. So anybody who tries to peddle you resilience is a liar, because that's not a thing. There's only trauma survival or not, okay? And so manage your trauma. Don't project it on other people. That's yours, right? Can we collectively heal? We can, but only if we can identify what the problem is. So do not project that onto other people, right? Ask for help. And I would say, mental health has gotten really so much better on college campuses than when I was a kid. I don't even know if we had mental health on my campus. It was definitely not a thing anybody talked about, like ever. So if you need mental health services, please go get some. They're everywhere. Right now, they're free. Get yourself a therapist, because you know what? Your advisor is not your therapist. That is not a role for them. That is not their job. They cannot do that for you. And that it's like crossing the streams in Ghostbusters, right? It causes explosions. So don't do that. Your advisor is not there to manage your mental health. They are there to create the possibility for you to succeed. That is the end of their job. So good mentees start to learn boundaries. Those are boundaries around yes and boundaries around no. And the no boundary is really, really important. And so if you don't know what your boundaries are, those are conversations you should have. How much work should I do? How much is overproductivity? What is an actual reasonable, manageable schedule for X, Y, or Z? How much do graduate students do this? Do you know other graduate students who do this? Whatever, blah, blah, blah. You need to find people who are in a similar situation so you can compare notes about those sorts of things. And good mentees will seek out multiple spaces to have those conversations and not just rely on a mommy or daddy parental figure mentor to tell them how to do the stuff. So you got to go seek that information out. And it exists now in a way that it didn't before, especially in the Zoom moment, which is why I was like, yo, we should just put this on the internet. There are so many videos now that you can go watch and get lots of perspectives on these things. That was not available when I was a junior colleague. So anyway, go seek out the information. And honestly, people will tell you you need good ideas. You don't. You need interesting ideas that you can follow through on. That's it. You need to follow through. The people who get jobs complete tasks. They get a thing done without destroying themselves. And then they do it again, and then they do it again, and then they do it again. You do not have to have the best ideas or whatever you perceive to be the best. You have to have interesting ideas that you can execute to completion. So advisees understand that they have to complete the tasks and they're able to do it. So those are my thoughts about it. Good advisees. Also, I don't choose advisees. They choose me. And so sometimes like I said, likability is not a thing. It's not a thing for presidential candidates. It's not a thing for grad students. You don't have to like your mentee. I don't have to like you to give you great advice about your writing. It is not an essential thing. So don't fetishize likability as like the thing that has to be prioritized over everything else. We're all super weird and that's all super fine. But the ability to complete the task is like where we got to keep the eye on the ball. And Rand.
Oh my gosh, wow. The Ghostbusters reference was amazing. Just wanted to throw that out there.
I'm an Xer. I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's really, if I could, I would just give this in like Top Gun GIFs if I could. Close to missiles, we're switching to guns all day long. Thank you for laughing.
Oh man. So the next question in mentorship is, where do you find good mentors, both formally and informally?
Okay, so Curtis and I started talking about informal mentors because I think academics, there are different kinds of people, but for the purposes of this conversation, let's talk about brain people and body people. Body people are out there mountain biking 24 hours a day, and like that's what they want to do. They bike all day long. They love the bike. They want to talk about bike things with other bike people, and they want to go fast on the map. That's what they do. They are body people, so they probably are not going to read your first book. We are mostly brain people, and we overdevelop the brain to the exclusion of everything else, which is one of the reasons why we're all so weird. And so you have got to have balance, and you have to have balance between the brain and the body, but you also have to have that balance with your advisor. So you need body coaches in the same way that you need brain coaches. So get out of your office. You have got to leave the chair. You've got to do it. If you can't find balance outside, you're not going to have any external way of reading the information that you're receiving. And it makes you much more likely to be gaslit and confused about how power works in the academy because you have no exteriority to it. So you have to find coaches or mentors or people who have expertise outside of your formal advisor person or your formal mentor, and you have to count on them for other life information because it will make the advice you're getting from your formal mentor so much richer. Your life will be richer because of it. So some people find those in church, and some people find those in civic organizations, and some people find that in politics. That's where I find mine. You know, some people find that in exercise classes, whatever. I don't care. It doesn't matter. You just have to go find them elsewhere. And so I also think, I mean, I do interdisciplinary work, obviously. And maybe people don't do that. I guess people don't all do that, but I don't understand how that happens, that you don't do interdisciplinary work. It makes no sense to me now. But anyway, you have got to find people outside of communication because we are a very narrow discipline that navel gazes very much in very toxic ways. And so the people outside of comm can be like, that has been written about already. You should perhaps read this giant body of literature that speaks on this question in ways that could help inform your project, et cetera, et cetera. So find those people outside of comm because they will help check the information that you are receiving from your mentors. Mentors sometimes come in unlikely places. And so you should be aware of them. They sort of pop out like little Yodas and you're not necessarily, I guess, I don't know, advertising for a mentor, or like taking applications, and they just show up with wisdom. So keep your eyes open because mentors aren't like permanent humans that are attached to you for life, right? Some of them are transient. Some of them are here for a couple of years. Some of them will be there for your entire career. But there's no telling how long they're going to be there, right? So know that these are relationships like any other, and some of them have expiration dates and some of them don't. And some of them are temporal and some of them are not. Think about your friends, for example, right? In college, your friends lived on your dorm floor because they were proximate to you. You didn't choose them. They were not the best people that could have been your friends. They didn't get you. They were just around. That is also how the academy works. So don't mistake the people who are just around as the people who are necessarily the best mentors for you.
Awesome. With that, I'm gonna start moving into the section of questions about writing and start working our way through the rest of the list and the rest of the subheadings we have here. So in reference to writing, I think this was my question. What is the process you go through to prepare to write? So you have an idea, you're starting to flesh it out. What does that process look like?
Okay, that process does not look the same for me as a full professor as it did when I was a first semester master's student. So that is not a static process. That's a thing that unfolds over an entire lifetime of work. Okay, so that you don't, it's not like you get there and then it's like, oh, I've got it now, it's all the same. That's not real. Okay, it's not a static thing. So when I was a graduate student, I said all kinds of random stuff that I would never want anybody to see ever, ever. I mean, ridiculous ideas that I put into papers for grades that I would never want anybody to see today, okay? And you know why that's okay? It's because you are hypothesis testing ideas. You're learning how to think in a structured way. So if you're gonna say ridiculous stuff, and by ridiculous, I mean outlandish, not racist or classist or sexist, right? Just out like you're trying out hypothesis test, you're hypo testing. You are testing out, you can be wrong in grad school in a way that you cannot in print. So that is a place to take risks. Do that, then take those risks and see how they play out because you have to find an academic voice that suits you. We don't all have the same voice. Mine is abrasive as hell, right? We can all write like that or take up that kind of space. I'm in a white body, so I can be abrasive and it comes out differently. So you have to find your own voice and figure out how other people read that as an audience, particularly as an audience that might publish you. So, the writing process for me is different now because I've got a giant brain full of information that is scaffolding. So I think now about huge scaffolds of giant knowledge bases that I've already built and how to take them in really interesting ways. But when I was younger, I was still just building that body of knowledge, right? And so that is process, not product driven. Grad school is about process. How do I write clean topic sentences that have a sexy claim? How do I integrate evidence? How do I produce warrants that justify the study? How do I discuss significance in a way that turns people on? That is what you're learning as a graduate student. You are not learning expertise yet. You are learning how to create knowledge, like very baby step stuff. But by the time you're publishing, then you are making interventions into a field of thought that has already pre-existed you, and you are approximating expertise, right? So you start by mimicking. So you should have templates. Like, I love this introduction to a book. So I just straight printed that sucker and put it right next to my computer and used literally, I was like, okay, and this is where a heading goes. And this is how we do a précis of chapters. And I see this is exactly where the thesis paragraph goes in a book. You should have templates that you model. Straight mimic that stuff, okay? That is how you learn. And you won't keep it all, but your hypothesis testing your authorial voice and the way that you're going to demonstrate your expertise and the kinds of interventions you want to make in the field. So it's okay to do that. And then as you get later in your career, people do different things. Some people love to write articles. I hate it. If I never write another article, it will be too soon. I absolutely loathe the form. It is too small for me. I don't, it's not interesting enough to do 9,000 words on anything. I did it because I had to. If I never did it again, it would be totally fine. And I also think that there's, in some ways, that the senior people should not take up spaces in the journals, given how important publisher perishes. So, that's different. But I think for me now, what do? I have got 10 books in my head and I just need to get the time to write them. And that's not the same as when you're starting out, right? So I have probably the next 10 years of my writing schedule already in my head. And I'm just trying to get out of my damn house in this pandemic to get them on paper. So that is not this. You do get to a point where it becomes easier, but you have to go through all of that hard writing and hard editing and the terrible reviews and the whole process before you can get to the point where you can hold that much of a trajectory of your writing career in front of you. Is that helpful?
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know if that helped anybody else, but that helped me. Here we go. We heard a little bit of this with your last response, but what issues do you battle with about your own writing and how do you combat them?
I hate revision. I hate it. I'm like seriously thinking about hiring a closer, because I will write 250,000 words of a draft in like 4 days. Like, I am the fastest composer, and the ideas are smart and the theory is there, but I am the worst closer. I will leave revisions until the day they're due for an R&R. Like, I hate it. I suck at it so much. Like, I'm the worst. But God help me, if you have an idea, I will develop it and whiteboard it and make it great. And that is my skill set. So I kind of want to hire a closer that is like, okay, I did the first, 4/5 of this article. Can you please write the conclusion and proofread it and send it with the email? Because I'm good for seriously the first 80% of a project. And then I just want it to end so I can move on to something else. So I battle with that. I do not battle with composition. I do not battle with hating myself in the writing. I do not battle with the literature or the theory. I only battle with the revision. And honestly, with the articles, because I get very frustrated when there are more cooks in the kitchen that change my ideas. I love it when that comes together and it becomes a collaboration, but very rarely it does. And people are just like, write a different book, write a different article. Well, if I wanted to write that, I would have done that. I obviously did not. That is not helpful feedback. So I struggle a lot with that. And so what do? I'm much better. It turns out I was a good book writer. I did not know that. Nobody taught me how to do that. I'd never had a single conversation with an adult person ever about how to write a book. So I made that up. It took very long. It was very grueling, and it turned out okay. It turns out I'm good at that. So I will probably just write a ton more books. Other than like being invited to do special stuff, that's my path. Thank you, Catherine. Sorry to miss you.
Wow. Let's see. Here's one. How do you, with becoming a book writer, how do you manage multiple projects now that you know that this is kind of the trajectory and the transition that you're going into? How do you manage? Have you just started 3 book projects and got them all laid out on your laptop and you're like, I'm gonna start with this one today, this one tomorrow?
Well, so the first book was my dissertation into book, and the second one was an FU to an external reviewer who trashed the first book. And it started as a review response, and then it became a footnote in that book, and then it became a conference paper, and then it became a book. So I don't imagine that that's going to be the trajectory of any of the other books. It was sort of a general clap back to the field. And then there was always going to be a third. So the first three books are sort of a triptych or a trilogy. And then the next one has nothing to do with them except same time period. So how do you juggle them? I don't know. I get really resentful when other stuff takes up the brain space for the book, right? So I struggle a lot with people wanting me to commit to their things when it's not in line with what I'm working on. So I would say, especially for junior colleagues, stay in a lane, even if it's a really wide lane with a lot of interdisciplinary stuff. When you publish and you cluster in the same area, over the first part of your career, you develop actual expertise instead of being a dilettante. So the dilettantes exist, they're mostly white, and they just like get to write about whatever fancies them, okay? And that is not a way to build expertise. It's not a way to get a job. It's not a way to get tenure. It's not a way to build a career. People do it, but that's very narrow. The kinds of bodies that can accomplish the dilettantism is a very narrow subset. So it's much easier to write in one time period around a figure, a cluster of figures, around, a particular theoretical disposition. The more that you can cluster that earlier in your career, the more efficient your writing will be. But if you hop around to all these different other things, it's very inefficient. Sometimes it can be really creative, but I see people spin out because they have too many disparate interests and they don't intersect and they don't create a cohesive space for expertise. And so it's better to have a scaffolded approach where it's like, okay, well, I definitely know I need to know this history, and then I need to know these theories, and then, oh, here are the gaps in literature, and then here's where the projects can go. In terms of writing them, I work on, when I'm writing hard, like pre-pandemic, I think the year that I went up for full, I published 4 different articles and finished Black Feelings. And it was the most writing that I have done, like in a period like that. And it was brutal. Also, it was awesome. And if I could write like that all the time, if people would leave me alone, like at work, and I could just like write, if I were a writer instead of an academic, a real writer all the time, I would write like that constantly. And so you have to find the pace that works for you, though. All the stuff that I'm saying about my career is not replicable because you are a different person, each of you, with different, advantages and disadvantages and resources and all of that stuff. So I'm saying these things as a self-aware reflexiveness to demonstrate, but you can't just like have my career. You have to do your own thing. In some ways, I think of it as bushwhacking, and I thought about it with this when I was young. You just need a machete and you got to hack your own way into whatever your lane of expertise is going to be and build it. And that part, I think, that's where the juggling of the projects is sometimes hardest. I will also say that I am only successful because I have a total cohort that I talk to every day about every idea. And like, we are available to drop a sentence or a paragraph and proof it and workshop it and talk it out. I did not have that as a grad student. I definitely did not have that as a junior faculty member. I have that now, and it has changed my life. And so, I would just encourage you to think very much about collaborative versus competitive models of humaning in the academy, because that shit has to change. It is so toxic. So anything that you can do to scaffold labor. I know Memphis has that great writing group. I don't work well in group situations like that because I don't have a problem sitting down and writing all day, every day. But I love that you do that because it's so collaborative. And I think it's a great model. And I wish all the other universities would model it because I think that it has empathy and it has support and it has built-in feedback mechanisms. And also then you're building a cohort that can write letters for each other as you matriculate through your careers. So, when you think about how to juggle the projects, also think about, who your cohort is. Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks, Amanda. Oh, I didn't know if that was I had no idea how it works, but I like that. I joked to Curtis. Curtis was like, yo, can you come to Memphis? And I'm like, no, I'm on sabbatical. I will be writing all day, every day, as much as I possibly can after this gross year off. But I was like, I will come through RJ Tracks, I swear, and see you all at some point in the fall.
Well, as you've heard, I will be in Memphis in the fall, so I'm excited about that. So moving forward, we're gonna shift gears here and transition into the questions that we developed over publishing. So let's go with where should grad students and new faculty publish?
Okay, so book reviews are important in a discipline that's moving towards book writing. And also nobody teaches you how to write them. Also, do not be ungenerous. It is so much effort to produce a book. I can't even explain it to you if you have not done it. Nobody does it for fun. It is so hard. So be generous and think about generosity as you think about book reviews, because especially for people on the hustle on the tenure track, be gentle with those books, please. They don't know what they're doing. It's the first time that they've done the thing. So you have to write book reviews as service, and also in thinking through how to do productive critique with book length projects, depending on which part of the field that you're in. I think that special issues are a place that are really, really important for developing new parts of the field and new voices. So at least when I edit, I'm very conscious about the importance of special issues for breaking down the gatekeeping of publishing and bringing in junior scholars to publish. So special issues are low-hanging fruit, often because the publication timeline is faster and the reviewers are down for the cause. So they want to make these scholarly interventions. And so you're going to get more favorable reviews in the special issues than you are with like Whitey McWhiterson, whoever is like reviewer 2 at the journals. So those are, you got to hit those hard. I think you want to have a sense about the ranking of the journals, right? And be honest and get honest feedback about where you should place them, right? When you send out your manuscripts, when they get inevitably rejected, and when you resubmit. Nobody talks about how to manage rejection in the academy. I don't know why. I guess they're all just so traumatized they can't do it. I just think it's like an inability to be emotionally available and do that vulnerability. But Stephen King has a great book, oddly enough. I've never read any of the dude's fiction, so I heard he's an excellent writer about scary stuff. I don't know. But he has a book called On Writing where he talks about the writing process. And oddly enough, it was the best book that I read when I was young about writing. And only because he was like, yo, I think it was Stand, or maybe It. Is that the clown one? Yeah, the clown one. Anyway, he was like, it got rejected 100 times. And he took a giant horse nail and he put it above his bed and he just shoved every rejection letter on it. And sometimes the academy feels that way. Everything that I've written has been rejected. That's not true. One thing that I wrote was accepted without any revisions. And it was like the best day of my life. I was like, are you kidding? It's like sinking the 3-point shot at the end of the buzzer in game 6. I don't know. It was epic. But everything else I've written has been rejected. So, I mean, and I don't know, everybody else is the same. It's not like there are these other professors who don't get their stuff rejected. So there's a bunch of online internet conversation about shadow CVs. The white men talk about is like, here's all the stuff that I got rejected from. And that's useful for a sense of perspective, because especially when you're a junior faculty member, you don't know how bad everybody else is failing. Thank you, Steve. Yeah. And you don't know how bad everybody else is failing too, but normalize talking about failure, please. Please normalize it, because it is everywhere and it's totally okay. So I would say have a sensibility about where you're placing those journal articles and about how that works. And I would say also that the people who can manage their disappointment about rejection do better at writing, because if you just accept the inevitability of the rejection, you can move past the critique phase and actually submit the things and get them done. So yeah, that's what I would say about where they should publish. I would be very cautious about encyclopedia entries, because they often do not count, and I don't think that they're a good use of time. I don't think it's a writing form that's super useful. I think it's kind of trash writing, to be quite honest. I'm sure that there's a difference of opinion. You're welcome to seek it out, whatever, but I think it's not a good use of your time to do those. Julia says, how do you feel about book chapters? I have to tell you, Julia, I love to write book chapters. I love them. I think that they have more creativity, and you're less bound to the citational performative politics of the journal essay, so that you can use more words to make the case. So I think you can develop better things. I wish they counted more in the R1 system for promotion and tenure, especially since we have to write books, but I love to write them. And I think that, edited collections are very useful, tools in our field. that also don't get enough hype, but that are really good. For graduate students in particular and junior faculty, I think you know, book chapters, you should have no more than probably 1 or 2 in an R1 job. But at R2s, I think they count more, and I think that that's good work, and I think that they're important, and I personally really enjoy writing them. I wish they counted more in some places, but we also have to change that, right? We have to change how the tenure thing works, because the capitalism is very bad for us. We need to manage expectations about productivity.
Awesome follow-up question, Julia. Thank you. What is something that you had wished you had known about the publishing process as you went through academia, from grad student to junior faculty, up until now?
Well, I don't know. You know, we don't produce doctoral students at Arkansas, right? And so we don't have a lot of folks in my department who are thinking through dissertations. But I wish we had had some instruction when I was younger about how to write articles and how to turn your conference papers and your class papers into articles. Like literally nobody spoke about publishing at all one time at my big R1 that I went to Maryland that produced a bunch of people. And this is not to pick on Maryland. I'm sure it definitely was not happening anywhere else either. It was completely banal as an oversight. And it was just like, there are whole parts of the academy you're just supposed to know through osmosis, and nobody teaches you. So I wish I would have had more formal academic training about the writing. I will say that the lit people on the comp side of rhetoric do much better at this. They do better at workshopping. They do better at reading each other's stuff. They do better at managing the rejection. They do better at where to place the journals. They do better at all of that stuff. The writing folks are much better at that than the communication folks are. And so I wish we had had that. I would say that the social scientists in some ways have a gift, because at least, you know, there's a standard, you know, 5-section, you know, thing that they can produce and just replicate over and over and over and over and over and over again. So they have a template for the production of journal articles that is pretty easy to follow. And once you can nail that, you can just crush out data sets into publications. And that's an advantage that they have certainly over the humanists in terms of how they publish. Emma says that was my experience as well. Mostly previous graduates sharing their insights, but nothing formal. I know, it's so strange, but I mean, this is why I said yes to Curtis, because nobody talks about this stuff out loud, and I just really can't understand why, except that it seems like information hoarding. Like the least generous read is that it's information hoarding and it's trying to keep the competition away from the castle gates. And the most generous read is that people just didn't think about it because it wasn't so competitive, and so they're not worried about like training new people. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Right. So another question about your books, Prison Power and Black Feelings. How was that publishing process the same, going from writing your first book and then moving into your second book? How were they similar? How were they different?
Well, you know, I'm thrilled that Steve and the press decided to host this chat for us, because I am ride or die for Mississippi, and they've been great to me at every level, from, you know, from the proposal stage to the review stage to the revision stage to the press and the publicity side to the marketing to the artwork for the books. And so this press has been remarkably consistent. And I would say, you know, you don't know how the reviews go, you know, you don't know how that's going to go, but I think that they managed it well. And one thing that I like about Mississippi is that it's very humane, right? So the goal isn't to gatekeep people out, it's to bring new people into the field. And that is not the case. Different presses have different personalities, and that is not shared at all the presses. And so there are presses that grind through junior scholars on the tenure track and force 4, 5, 6 revisions of a proposal or of a full manuscript, which is abusive, like just absolutely abusive. And what I like about Mississippi is that it has been such a generous and generative experience. But I mean, the second book is so much easier to, at least for me, it was so much easier to write because I knew how the thing was going to go. And also because I had built relationships with the press. So, you know, I think that there is a real importance to that is overlooked, and obviously it's not something that we talk about, except in that patronage sort of, you know, mafia way, where it's like, oh well, the editor of this series was my grad student and, you know, publishes all of the graduates from this program, blah blah blah. Like that stuff is also toxic, and that's not the case at Mississippi. They want to do bigger things. So, you know, presses have personalities and they are trying to cultivate particular kinds of relationships and constellations of relationships, and it's important to be aware of that. So I don't know, it got easier, I guess, is the takeaway.
Awesome. So we're coming up on like about 13 minutes before we go to Q&A. So I had a couple of questions that fell into the miscellaneous bucket. And actually, this was actually helped with me and a colleague of mine at Memphis as well. And one of the questions they had was about the job market, about when you go on the job market and you start negotiating that. So one of the questions they had was, what are some helpful hints you can give about both the academic job market and jobs outside the job market? And what are some ways to negotiate the salary?
Okay, so this might seem like ridiculous, but also do not wear heels for the job interviews, because you don't know if you're going to have to hike up hills or cobblestones. So that was a rookie mistake that absolutely destroyed my mind. Everybody's like, you have to wear a suit. And I'm like, with heels? Are you kidding me? And they're like, no, you have to do this. I mean, it wrecked do not do that. But in terms of like the interviewing process, it's going to be harder because we're going to, I mean, I don't know what the numbers are now. It's like 700,000 jobs have been lost from higher ed since the pandemic. Some of those will come back and some of them will come back differently. And the next 4 years is going to be absolutely critical. And we're seeing what happens with higher ed, especially community colleges, honestly, because I think they will grow substantially. So I think, I think nobody really talks, it's a little bit better now, about how to do a PhD and also be able to pivot away from higher ed as a job space. So I don't know, I'm a poor kid. So I'm always like, what's my out? What's my out? What's my out? What's my out? So I chose to go to grad school in Maryland because I knew that there were a bunch of universities inside of DC that I could adjunct at if I wanted to stay a professor and couldn't get an R1 job. And also I do politics. So I'm like, well, if this PhD thing doesn't work out, I can roll right into a low level political job and still not lose salary. So think about where you go to grad school for a PhD. Think about, because you're not going to get to choose, especially if you want to be a full-time academic, you're going to have less choice about where you live. And so for me as a Politico, DC was the natural place to go because I had the most outs there in case things went horrible. And I was lucky because I came out on the mark. I did a round of interviews while I was finishing my dissertation in 2006. They were all tragic, man. I had no idea what I was doing. Nobody professional. I had no idea. I was a disaster. I'm so glad that the internet did not exist then, basically, because I can't imagine those things being recorded. But when I came out the next year, it was very different and there were tons of jobs. And so I had the advantage of I think I probably did 18 interviews. I think I did 12 campus interviews. And that is not the case anymore, but they gave me a bunch of valuable information. Also, I got to build relationships with all of those people, even though I didn't get those jobs or take those jobs. And that's not the case here necessarily anymore. Although Zoom, I think, will probably democratize some of the interview process, I hope, in a way that we didn't have that advantage. And I also came out right before the Bush crash, before higher ed was destroyed. So things are different now, I think. In terms of negotiating, I negotiate everything. I mean, the capitalism is bad. It would be better if we had universal basic income so that your salary was not predicated on how well you negotiated. But I negotiate everything. And so I would say with your first job, regardless of whether it's in higher ed or not, you always ask for $2,000 more than whatever they give you. Like, no matter whatever the last negotiation is, say, I will sign today for $2,000 more. And you almost always get that. And what does that turn? Even if that's $100 a month, right? That's like make or break for some people. So that's important. I will say that when I got the job at Arkansas, they refused to negotiate my salary, even though I had other offers in hand. My chair did. He's like, it's not done here. And I was like, I'm a woman. You're basically cutting me out of millions of dollars and lost money over the course of my career. It's unacceptable. And he refused to negotiate my salary or my startup. That has changed in my department. I have changed that culture and how everybody gets to negotiate their things. But, you should be negotiating for moving expenses. You should be negotiating for research money, for lab equipment. for office furniture, computer stuff, essential, whatever is essential for you doing your job, archival trips, negotiate everything. And anytime that you can produce actual tangible leverage, you negotiate. And if you have, this is why mentors outside of your department are important, because if you have a direct line to your dean, you can go around your chair, right? If you have produced leverage that is valuable to your dean. So, as you matriculate through, a workplace, it's important to have admin mentors that can teach you where the levers are, either how you can produce leverage or how you can exert it in different spaces. So for me, I direct a gender studies program, but I do critical race work, and I'm deeply, invested in justice work, which in higher ed gets, truncated down into DEI. So, that becomes a valuable space because it turns out the white people don't want to do the DEI. Who would have thought? So, there is leverage there that is produced because of that service that exists for me in a way that it does not exist for other people, because I am inhabiting so many places, politically around justice work, around campus, but also in the city and state. And then, if you win things, that produces leverage. So awards produce leverage, and some of them produce more leverage than others. But on the whole, if you are demonstrating that you're bringing in social capital to your institution, you have more leverage to negotiate. And so, you should not see negotiation as something, you should never be shamed for wanting to negotiate. That's toxic. And you should work with people who want to produce a happy and functional department where everybody feels like they get celebrated when they win. And that is the ideal situation. It's like, I don't know, state of nature. I wish it were the state of nature, but, I think you want to cultivate departmental communities where you can celebrate everybody's wins, because it's not a zero-sum game. There is plenty of work to go around, and there's plenty of success to go around. And our job is to create more opportunities so that more people can succeed and they can build leverage to divest into their communities.
Awesome. I have one more question, and then we're going to shift to a floor Q&A, if that's all right.
Yeah.
What unsolicited advice do you have for junior colleagues?
Unsolicited, write every day. So that is the habit. If I had to pick one habit that is like the thing I think that makes me happy about my career, it's that I am not avoiding the writing. And so it's not hard to do it because I like it. If the writing is not your thing, it is not your thing. You do not push the square peg into the round hole. Be honest with it if it is not your thing. But I will say it didn't start out being my thing. It took a long time before I was like, oh, I can do this. I've got this. I mean, because you don't get honest feedback. You get teacher feedback, which is not helpful necessarily in developing your intellectual mind. And so, for me, we started with mentorship, and I think peer mentors are more important, than elder mentors. And I also think younger mentors are important. So, even though I was probably unmentorable as a young, my mentors now are peers that I am ride or die with, that I talk to every day and workshop all of our ideas with. And that has been the most fruitful space for me as a I don't know, middling to, I guess I'm now senior. It's hard because I don't have the grays yet, but it's the writing every day, and it's the peer mentors. I would also say avoid doing the toxic trauma bonding with your graduate cohort. So I do not suffer from the avoidance or the anxiety. So that is not a space that I have inhabited, but I just see people toxic trauma bond with their colleagues in their graduate program over mental health problems, and it sucks everybody down because people are not getting the support that they need. And so the codependence, the emotional codependence around the trauma of graduate school is really fundamentally bad. And so this is why you got to have a life outside of the university and not get sucked into your job as your identity, because you got to have some, you got to have some way to blow off steam and to have that exteriority of perspective on the academic situation. So, don't do the toxic trauma bonding. And also, I think it's important to not reproduce domination. So don't do that. Don't do mean stuff, right? That's even innocuous gossip produces hostility and resentment. And so I try and cultivate joy as much as possible and try and play with those people. I mean, you know, you as a senior academic, you know, there is even less space to play because everybody is so like into their grown-up navel gazing. So it's like that stuff instead of youth. And so they can't do it either. So this is the time to play and to try out ideas and to dare, you know, and to push yourself out of your comfort zone to be as interesting as you can be. And so I would say cultivate joy and play with your graduate cohort instead of the trauma stuff, because you know, the trauma, because producing trauma for yourself and others is a sure way to make this a hellish long-term career choice. And it does not have to be that way. It's not entirely our choice, but insofar as there are micro decisions that we can make and relational decisions that we can make to produce and cultivate joy and to share resources, we're going to be in a better position. So try and divest, you know, resources into places where people need them and try and share that kind of generosity that I started at the top of the hour talking about.
Well, awesome. Thank you for answering the questions that we have. I still got questions here in case we don't have questions from the floor, but now I want to turn it over and let folks who join the chat and join this, the questions you have now, everyone else, other than what I've asked for the last hour. So I'm gonna go on mute and turn it over to y'all for a couple moments.
No, what do y'all want to talk about? Damari, are you laughing at me? I see you laughing up there.
What don't we talk about? Oh man, we have all day. No, a question I would ask you is, when it comes to like reaching out to people, not necessarily for mentorships, but like just help. I know when I'm still a grad student, but a few years ago, I know like when I finally met some of those authors that I read, I was like, oh man, I want to like try to get with them, and but I realized I wasn't getting the same kind of reciprocity as I thought I was trying to give. Like, oh, and I used to have this weird feeling where, like, okay, I want to hang out with Professor X because this person I think has a lot of social and political capital, but I don't really get that kind of vibe like they're cool. So like, what would you recommend like for a grad student or even just like junior faculty who coming in and it's like, I want to do this stuff without necessarily saying like just straight F them, you know what I mean? But just kind of having that good like distance where, I don't know. Does that make? I'm trying to make it make sense.
Yeah, don't don't be like, can we meet at the NCA bar? Okay, because that is an awkward way for the senior people to do the mentoring. It puts us in a very terrible position. So but you can't ask for a coffee hour, and that should be no more than 30 minutes. I mean, I'm down from Memphis, so I'm gonna say yes to everybody from Memphis all the time because we collaborate on so much stuff. And I think that there are maybe some other people who are interested in doing that kind of work, but they're like that. I don't think that the mafia capitalism and, the patronage model allow for, this kind of what I think is very promiscuous advising. And I'm into that because I'm like, you should go and get, feedback from all kind of places all the time. But if you're asking, you got to put boundaries around what that is and explain what your ask is. So you're negotiating for time and resources from people who are busy and do not know you. And so I would just be like, yo, my name is, I love your ex. Can we meet for 30 minutes? Can I get 30 minutes of a phone call? I have a thing I would like to chat with you about. Thanks so much for considering. I know your time is really valuable. And then you always have to follow up with a thank you note, right? Like higher ed is so much thankless trash labor. And so when people get thanked, they're like, okay, I can continue to do this. It gives them the motivation to continue to share information. And so I would also say that a lot of people are ungenerous, not because of ill will, but often because they're so burnt out and overextended. And so try and be as generous in your read of that as possible, unless harm is actually produced. Everybody's working 10 jobs and the hustle gets harder up the ladder. So, I would just say that be clear about your ask for a finite amount of time and stick to it. Coffee is better than beer every time, even though I'm obviously into the whiskey. And I would say that if you get a no, don't take it personally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny. Can I tell you a story about that at the risk of being self-indulgent? I had a request last week from a dude whose work I love that is not in comm. And he was like, yo, I loved your book and I'm writing about this thing. Do you know anything about it? And I was like, I do not. But also, my local library stocks your book, and this is my Facebook picture, and it has my book, and then like Stacey Abrams, and like how to Derek Bell, and like all these giants, and his book is right next to it, and John Bolton's is on the other side, and I'm like, this is the most hilarious stuff because it's like Dick Gregory, and it's all of this like radical gender race stuff, and then John Bolton's memoir. And I was like, maybe you'll get a kick out of it. He's like, oh my God, this made my day. So that dude and I are going to be friends forever, even though I couldn't answer his question. And he just straight cold called me on the email machine, you know? So I know that I could roll back on him at some point and be like, I'm that chick whose book is next to the shelf on yours with John Bolton. And also, I have a question for you, sir. So I would also say Twitter is super generous in a way that Facebook is not. Facebook is hateful and terrible. And Twitter people, I will say, as somebody who does social justice activism all across this country, some of my closest friends outside of academia are activists, and we met on Twitter and then met in real life and are now lifelong people. So don't underestimate your ability to do serious, intimate, you know, brain building with people on Twitter. And Facebook is garbage for it, though. Other thoughts or questions?
Well, if nobody's gonna ask, I'll just keep asking questions, Lisa.
That's all right.
All right. Another question for somebody who's like get their first job. What's like that first thing they should do? Like that first, I would say, month when they get their first job.
Exhale, because it's hard and stressful, and it's hard, and it's okay to exhale and not get up on the hamster wheel. So you want to think about intentional relationship building, but you got to remember those people that you work with are not your friends, they're just your colleagues. So don't try and overbond. So a lot of people start their jobs and then they word vomit all their crazy out, you know, all of it, like family stuff and graduate school stuff and dirt on their colleague. Don't do that. Do not run your mouth that way, because you have no idea who you're talking to and who they know. You do not know those people. They are just your coworkers. So don't do that. I would say if you'll get a startup fund generally, and you got to think really seriously about how to spend that. And one thing I wish somebody had said to me is you should use your startup to be a lifetime member of like NCA or whatever, so you never have to pay dues again. I did not buy my robes because I don't wear them. You know, I'm not about that life. So I did not buy my robes. People have intense feelings about that. I lost my diplomas in the move, like the movers lost them. I didn't replace them, you know, like whatever. But I would say, like, in terms of cash flow things, buy the lifetime membership, spend $1,000 and just pay the membership due. And then you're not constantly trying to get nickel and dime for travel money from your department. I would say you want to set up 30-minute coffees with the people who you're most interested in the college to introduce yourself, because especially for folks of color and for queer and trans scholars, you have got to protect yourself with a network of faculty members outside of your department to provide external accountability on them if they do nonsense. And so if your department knows that all these folk around campus ride for you and publish with you and come to your events and, you know, invite you to participate in their stuff, they are less likely to mess with you because the fallout will be worse for them. So it is very important to create a social network that creates external accountability on your, especially if you're at a PWI, you know. And I will say that when I got tenure, you know, because I do all the political stuff, I had all these political people write letters for my tenure file, and I'm sure nobody read them. And also they're there permanently for the FOIA. So we're all clear that there was no plausible deniability about what Lisa writes about or what she does, because here are all of these Republicans and Democrats who are riding for her, right? So I think very carefully about how to scaffold, you know, networks so that people cannot do the shenanigans with you. Is that useful? Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
Emma says she bought her robes and an iPad. I love that. I will say though, a word of caution about tech. So the way that tuition dollars work is that usually the student activity fee that comes in as part of the tuition dollars can always be used for technology. That is the easiest thing to get replaced, that you should not use your research money for. Keep the research money and then go back for a new computer every like 5 or 6 or 8 years. It's easier to get and especially the CARES Act provides for like massive tech reimbursements. So I would try and not spend your money on tech. That is one thing that almost all of your institutions will be drowning in money, that they can give you your iPad and they can give you your tech stuff. The schools are flush with cash about technology right now, especially after the CARES Act. So I would try and leverage that from the tech people any other way. Yep. This is true. But the CARES money, I'm saying, cannot be used for like salary replacement. It's not going to hire instructors, but it is absolutely earmarked for tech. So right away when the CARES Act happened, I emailed my office manager and I was like, I need a ring light for these talks at the house. I need better headphones. I need blah, 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 blah. All that stuff got reimbursed with CARES money. So, get you some technology, but I would try not to spend. You might have to spend your RIF account when you get there, but on the whole, the tech stuff should actually be easier to do, especially at institutions that are not financially strapped and facing massive fiscal challenges. But I mean, even them, I'm thinking of like the middle bit schools, Iowa, Kansas, who are under some financial strain right now, and they're just drowning in cash money from the CARES that's for tech. So. But I would say then, Demaria, to follow up on that, learn about how the money works. When you get your first job, how does the money work? Who gets the money? Who decides about how the money goes? Where is the hustle? Summer teaching is the best hustle when you're young. But I will say it's tempting to get that cash money, and writing is more important on the tenure track, because if you don't get that tenure, you're screwing yourself out of all that extra money. So it's more important to take the hit when you get that first job in the cash, even though it's tempting to teach all that extra money. It is a bad use of time, because you want the salary bump to associate and you want the job security of the tenure. So be very, very, very selective about when you teach overloads and when you don't. And I will tell you, you will burn yourself out on the teaching, and that is not what you are in a tenure track job to do. You are there to publish. So do not get it twisted. And I say that as a poor kid who's on the grind. So I get it. And I would say we just had I don't know, I think it was Benny Wang with Master maybe posted this week. There was a big Facebook conversation about like what it means to be financially stable for the first time in your 40s. And so a bunch of us middlings were talking about that, right? So I get that. And also try and resist it if you can, because the teaching will steal all of your writing time away, and you cannot get promoted on your teaching. So
man, you was reading my brain, Lisa. I was just going to ask you that. I was like, because obviously that first job, you're not making all this money as academics make, right? So, of course, the thought, especially again, me growing up poor, I thinking hustle, hustle, hustle. And so I know that's one of those things I'm thinking about as I get close to the end. So yeah, thank you for answering that.
Well, and also you got to figure out what your 401k looks like. So nobody tells you anything about financial literacy, and the decisions that you make that first year on the job about how much money you're putting in your 401k, if you're going to do a targeted fund, if you're going to do TIA or Fidelity, those decisions are going to have massive ramifications. And I say that not to freak you out about money, because as poor, I know my people at least are freaked out about money and can't talk about it. But you got to do some financial literacy there, and nobody is going to bring it to you to make good decisions about retirement and health insurance and disability and blah, 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 blah. So those are important decisions to make for sure. I would also say do not buy a house right away necessarily. Have some sensibility about that. And maybe it makes sense and maybe it doesn't make sense, but don't rush into it to make sense just because you finally have the opportunity to do so, right? Think about habitability very, very deeply before you just jump in and commit to a house. Because I know a lot of people rush in and do this, and they buy a house and they regret it. So think about home ownership and that investment, I think. Other thoughts?
Do you have any suggestions for those of us who might be looking for adjunct work for the first time in a new city?
Oh, yeah. I do actually. So I will say that adjuncts have a lot of space right now. And at Arkansas, we hire tons of adjuncts who just cold call all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. And they stay for a long period of time. And they are, I think, a very important part of our teaching like life at the university. And I would say if there seems like there's a lot of opportunity, try and choose the largest institution possible. Because they'll have more resources, or the smallest that does the most loyalty. Because if they're the smallest and they're tight knit, then they care, like everybody has a face and they're not just a name, right? That can be fired. So think about the kind of institution. I actually taught a 4-4 as a grad student. I taught 2 at Maryland on the GA ship, and then I taught 2 at GW in the afternoons. And then I told nobody, but I also got a GA ship in the library and just didn't tell my chair because I was out there on the grind. So I worked 20 hours a week in the GovDocs in the Federal Library Depository. And so, the 4-4 is manageable to write. I did 4-4 the entirety of my grad career. And it is workable, right? As the first sort of foray out into the job market. I would also say one thing that helped me on the job market is that I had taught, because I was teaching 4-4, I had developed or prepped 12 classes at Maryland when I went on the job market. And I will tell you that everybody remarked on the breadth of teaching. And it was in Cold War. It was argumentation, obviously, rhetoric of Black America, speech writing. I mean, just like the whole gamut. So there are downsides to that. So I became really good at prepping quick classes all the time with interesting ideas and topics. And so if you can get a place where there's flexibility in teaching, it will definitely enhance your CV if you're going to go and do a round of big job search next. I would also say that it's also true that if you have a smaller number of preps, sometimes that's helpful. Depending on your situation. I find that to be boring. So if I had to teach 4 sections of the same thing, I don't know that I would be so bored. So it was always better for me to have multiple preps and lots of different, I taught interpersonal, I taught all kinds of stuff, right? So I would say, think critically about, what you want to offer them. And if you have any opportunity to negotiate that, think about what your preference would be ahead of time so that they don't just spring it on you. But we hire people that cold call all the time. Like, yo, I just moved to the area. We have a guy right now who sells films. He's a film writer and he sells films all the time, like big films. And his wife happens to be from here. So he's like, I found myself in Fayetteville. He's got a PhD in cultural anthropology from Texas. And he teaches film classes for us and is amazing. Just randomly happened to be in Fayetteville. So, I mean, that happens and it's really, really normal is what I'm saying. So there's not any wiggle room really to negotiate anything for adjuncts though, because that money is set, it's an institutional standard. And so there can't be salary compression because it's, short-term contracts. But that's what I would say about that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Lionel, what does an attractive incumbent for an R1 teaching tenure track position look like to you? Okay, so I'm on a lot of search committees for tenure track jobs, okay, like a lot. And I will say that it is very rare that a tenure track position is going to go for a senior hire. So know that even though you know a bunch of senior people that are looking to change, it is very rare that an open assistant professor job is going to go to a senior person over a junior person. And that is largely because a lot of academic departments really want the junior colleagues because they don't want competition. Okay, so there is a bunch of weird stuff that happens around there that absolutely favors junior candidates. And I think in a good job market, the candidates that are most successful have a robust research agenda. Now that doesn't mean 6 or 7 pubs. That means 2 pubs. Like, can you get a thing published? Do you understand the thing that's happening? And can you articulate what your next 5 years are going to be? So we get candidates all the time that got 2 interesting hits. And then it's like, what are you going to do for the next 5 years? And they're like, I don't know. I want some graduate assistants to help me work on this. And it's like, what are you talking about? You don't need graduate assistants to help you research. That's not a thing. So, you have to be able to say what your trajectory is. Like, what are you aiming for? In pretty concrete ways. And then in terms of teaching, are you competent? The R1 job expects you to already be okay at teaching, and nobody's going to like help you navigate that. So it's a minimal part of the job interview, and it's a minimal part of the job, even though it's 40% of the contract. And service also, I mean, is also minimal, because you are not doing a ton of service as a graduate student, but there are particular jobs that have to be filled. So like, you have to have somebody that's going to do graduate outreach, and you have to have somebody who's going to manage the undergraduate curriculum, and you have to have somebody who manages internships, and you have to have somebody who does blah, blah, blah. So there are departmental jobs, and it is helpful that you understand from your perspective what happens in those jobs. Like, eventually I would love to be a graduate, coordinator for a department, because blah, blah, blah. Or, if you can see yourself doing that service work in the department and in the field, you are much more likely to be seen that way by others, because you're already doing that framing on the front end, right? So it's helpful for you to do that framing up front. I think your research statement is probably the most important document that you send to a committee to look at, because they're like, oh, are the students going to be into this? Are we into this? Are we going to want to listen to talks about this for the next 6 years? Like, that's what I think the research folk are into. Like, what can we hear about this for 6 years or not? And do you know what's coming next? And do you have a path from A to B? But I will say that who gets jobs is complete luck. And anybody who tells you otherwise is a liar, because it is a series of all kinds of petty stuff behind the scenes that you are not privy to, that generally have nothing to do with the candidate, that have everything to do with whatever nonsense dynamics have happened in a department where everyone's been tenured and has been working together and hating each other for 20 years. So when you don't get the job, don't necessarily internalize that as personal failure, because I really just can't explain to you how petty the job stuff is and can get. And I say that with just like years and years of experience. It is not predictable who gets the jobs. And so sometimes the rock stars don't even get in the door. And sometimes unexpected people get jobs when there are people with better resumes in the pile. And it is a total crapshoot. And sometimes I think that is helpful to know. And sometimes it's probably terrifying, but it's definitely true. Yeah, they're just variables that you cannot control for, Lionel, at all. But know what your output is going to be. So you should say, like, by the time I go for tenure, I will have 8 to 10 articles, or 12 to 15, whatever the benchmark is for the kind of institution you're aiming for. You should have a sensibility about understanding what, when they say the tenure requirement here is blah, you should have already had a sense about that and be able to say, yeah, well, I've got these 3 articles about this, and these 3 articles about this, and these 3 articles about this, and then I'm doing a book, or I'm doing this NEH, or whatever your narrative is about yourself. Even if you don't come through on all of that, you have to show that you can produce a trajectory for yourself. Because this is one of the reasons why we don't professionalize. I just don't think people want to do the mentorship work for junior faculty to get to the point where they get tenure. I think a lot of them don't want to actually do that work. It's so much work, right? And so the more, if you can come in and demonstrate that you are not going to be, the squeakiest wheel, that you'll ask sensible questions for information that you need, but not produce a bunch of chaos or not need a lot of hand-holding, you are going to have a more favorable impression, because it's a lot of hard work to get somebody through the tenure, at the end of tenure. And so, I would also never trash talk the institution that you're at on a job talk. I don't know why people do it. It stuns me every time. It is the worst. It's the worst. Do not do that. You want to say nothing negative on a job talk. You don't know who's in the room. So keep your mouth shut about that stuff, even if it's real bad. Even if people ask you directly, I would not, no negative talk. It is not good, because that stuff gets out about you and it becomes about you. And don't do that. It's toxic. Don't do that. Good question.
Got another question, if I may. Recommended books for not necessarily turning your dissertation into a book, but just as far as book writing and kind of formatting, any kind of, I know I've been reading a lot of the Chicago writing series, but I'm wondering, do you have any recommended books that you might use?
I would no, but no, because I did it the hard way and that stuff didn't exist when I was young. But Kate Wall is at Stanford and does a ton of series, and you can Google her. She has a bunch of stuff about turning dissertations into books. And I will say that the presses often do those kind of panels at the major conferences. And it is worthwhile to talk to acquisitions editors and series editors about that process and tips that they have or pitfalls that they see, especially if you're building a relationship with the press. So like, you know, when Davis came at me about this new series that he was starting, you know, we had a bunch of conversations on the front end before I even produced a proposal about his vision for the series and his relationship with the press and how much he loves Steve, which is obviously was important to me. You know, we had a bunch of conversations about that, about expectation setting. And I will say that, you know, at every step, you can do that expectation setting. Like, you know, what is your turnaround time for the proposal? What is your turnaround time for feedback from reviewers? You know, what is the average, you know, length of time between reception of the text and publication? Like all of those things, expectation set, and the good presses will be honest with you about that. And when they miss their own internal deadlines, it's bad. Also, all of the presses have reputation that they trade on as social capital. And so, you know, you have to have a sense of an editor and about how responsive they are, about whether they can close the deal when they take your proposal to the board for a vote. I mean, that kind of stuff is you need to know about. And you can only do that by talking to other people who are doing the book writing process and who can be like, you know, I got to tell you, this series tanks people on X, Y, or Z. And everybody knows what they are and they're happy to talk about them, but you got to ask. They're not going to share it willingly because they don't want to call out and they don't want to poison the well, but they will share privately with you. And so people will tell you, here are some things, pitfalls, presses, and series to avoid if you ask them and you've got a relationship with them where they feel like they can trust you. Because the point is not to run down the people. The point is to say, where are the paths for junior scholars, especially doing the kind of work that we do, that will be experiences that are positive and generative and ethical. And that's really the thing. But what you don't want is to get sucked into ego nonsense when you're on the tenure track trying to get your first book out that is going to crush your soul or screw up your contract. You do not want that. So, you know, less chaos is better. If you don't produce this, that's ideal. And if they don't produce it, that's ideal. And so you want to negotiate relationships, you know, through your career. The best negotiations produce 2 positive outcomes for each party, right? Everybody goes home a winner. And that's how you should see every negotiation from this point forward, is how can I produce the most positive outcome for me and for them? And good presses understand that. Obviously UPM does, that's why I was interested in them hosting this conversation. And other presses do not have that. And so you do not have the time to waste, you know, managing the egos of a bunch of folks who are already made. And they should not be poisoning the well for junior scholars on the come up. So there are editors who want to shepherd new voices into the field, and they want to pair them with reviewer mentors that will give them honest feedback. And that's the kind of stuff that you want. Other questions? One last. If we have the time, any advice for doc students responding to conference papers for the first time? That's a great question. Yes. So be generous. Be generous, be generous, be generous, be generous. Give the kind of feedback you would like to receive, because you are not the expert yet. You are training in a community of scholars. You are relationship building. Conferences are about relationship building. You are not seeking the truth. You're not even approximating the very best argument that could be made. You are literally learning how to articulate your scholarly voice in a community of scholars so where you can be heard and where you can collaborate. So see it as a collaboration. And so I think that the best responses for conference papers, ask questions rather than point out flaws. Your job is very rarely to point out flaws. Be generative. So I love this idea. I wanted to hear more about it. I love this idea. I wanted to hear more about it. It made me think of this and this and this, which I thought would have been fascinating to explore. It left me wondering X, Y, and Z. If you go in with the idea that you're the curious onlooker who wants to have a positive experience that might turn into solid professional relationship building, then you have to ask more questions and answer fewer questions. So I think, you know, don't go over time. Humor is always welcome, and be generous. And I would say you want to point out things that you love and things you wanted to hear more about, because the point is not to provide the corrective for the paper that you respond. Like, this is the wrong frame. This is better theory. It's also not the case that you are performing your most professional version of yourself and trying to impress people. You just need to find your authentic voice and say interesting things in response to the interesting things that they said. So but I would just say be generous, because you're not gonna, like, I don't know, solve the puzzle, find the truth, dig up the dinosaur bone. You're not doing that work. You are doing the work of learning how to play nicely in the sandbox with other people. That's what conferencing is. You're very welcome. Curtis, back to you, my friend.
Yes, we have a couple more moments, so I wanted to kind of leave it open. I have questions over here as well. Let me just grab one real quick, unless I'm trying to keep my eyes up. How has the pandemic made writing different? How has you've talked often about, like, you grind through writing on your own. I personally, for my writing, I like going places. Like, it used to be like a local coffee shop. It used to be like a sandwich shop that had free Wi-Fi, even if it was just to just get out of the norm. And so, I mean, I've basically been home. I think twice. So how is, other than what's been different for your writing?
I mean, I'm doing childcare 24/7, and it's great because I'm happy to spend time with her because she's 10 and it's interesting and blah blah. And also, I have read 3 books in the last year, and I bet I read 60 books a year minimum. I mean, I'm a debater kid, so I read massive amounts of stuff. So I feel completely derailed about that. I have written one essay that's 80% done, for very predictably. And but I also got promoted to full right as the pandemic started, and Black Feelings came out in February last year, so I was ready to take a little bit of time off anyway. And so I thought, well, it's the summer, I was going to take the summer off from writing, then the summer turned into the fall, and then the fall turned into the spring. So I'm really antsy. I also write in coffee shops, I mean, every single day, and while I travel, and I stop by the coffee shop that I go to, and they bring out your drinks now. And I was like, so now that the coffee shop is open and people come inside, or people sticking around, and they're like, are you thinking about coming back to write? We can open it just, and so I'm like, absolutely going to go back. I've been vaccinated fully now. And so they're like, come back and we'll just set aside this corner and nobody will come and mess with you, because they're like, come back to the coffee shop. So I think I'm going to let the gap, because the thing about coffee shops is it's a community outside of the academic community. So then they're like, what are you writing about? And then we have all these fruitful conversations, because, they don't know. And so we talk about all kinds of stuff, and I do emotional support for them and financial support for them. And then they provide endless tea and croissants or whatever for me. And so I thank them in my books. Like, thank you to, by name, the baristas that, take care of me, because they're part of my community self-care, and I take care of them. So, that has been bad for me. I mean, I just sort of want to be like, check on your extrovert friends. We are not okay. So I am super ready to go back to being out in the world and doing work. The public address conference is in Lawrence in September, and it's going to be epic. And I think it'll be the first time that, like, the rhetoric peeps get back together and the gang's all together. And I think it's going to be a rager, and I can't wait for it. Even though I have ambivalence about, like, academic work, and I don't know that it should have been my career choice, I will be glad to see everybody there and get the ideas, back on track. I need the mob chair at the coffee shop. That's hilarious. No, it is like that though. I told them it would be fine if they put a plaque in this, like, Lisa's spot. But only because there are all these terrible old white men that harass me all the time with their nonsense. And so I had hoped it would be like a deterrence to like, don't engage Lisa. So there's sort of a running joke about it. Like, you know, the cheers sort of like put your name on the beer stein. I'm like, could you just put it on my chair where I drink my tea? So yeah, it has eroded my ability to write. And honestly, I have shifted to speaking. So I've done, I don't know, 100 of these talks in the last year. And so that has helped me, but it's awful. And so I kudos to any of you writing under deadlines right now. I nothing but solidarity for you. And, you know, obviously Curtis just hollered at me on the Twitter. I do this kind of mentoring for all kinds of folks across the discipline, even though they were never my students, but I'm available for it because I think it's really important. And a bunch of us already have relationships of one form or another. So feel free to call on me if you have questions that weren't answered here, or problems or what have you. But I appreciate you taking your time out to support Curtis and to come and hang and talk about professionalization.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that brings us to 5 o'clock. I want to say thank you to Dr. Corrigan. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I got like a notebook full of notes. So this has been for me so much. And then for Steve, thank you for yourself and University Press Mississippi for hosting. Truly grateful, truly thankful for that as well. I guess I'll stick on and hang back for a minute when you all want to leave, and I'll be here. But thank you all for coming.
You say, I'm missing you in the IRL. RP track soon.
Yay.
Is that Doc Johnson over there? I see you.
Yeah, good seeing you, Lisa. See you
I'm
soon.
Andre.
I miss you, man. Take care of yourself.
All right.
You too, Dr. Johnson.
Thanks so much for this, Steve.
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, this really was perfect for the next 50. This is exactly the kind of thing that I thought it would be. And, you know, it reminded me a lot of the advice that we got in the MFA program in Fayetteville. The kind of stuff you were doing is the stuff that was their stock and trade, right? And so the MFAs had kind of a leg up on certain things like that. So well done, just really great. And Curtis, great questions. What a fun group. This is great. All right, I'm gonna save the recording and thank you a ton. Call on me anytime, and I'll send both of you the link when it's at Vimeo too, because people may come to you to ask about this. So have a great evening.
Thank you.
Y'all.
Thank you, Curtis.
Thank you. I can say Lisa, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I appreciate it so much. I've been like teetering, like Dr. Corrigan.
No, it's all good. All good. What a great collaboration. I appreciate you both so much.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Y'all have a great one.
Okay.